Dobrý večer v kempu. Vítám vás tady. Jsem moc rád, že jste přišli. Moje jméno je Jiří Jaroš. Měl bych vás provést dnešním večerem, ale hlavní slovo budou mít samozřejmě naši hosté a zelenomodrá infrastruktura. My se tomuhle tématu tento týden věnujeme v Praze, celkově vlastně celý týden. Včera této dnešní akci předcházela konference, která celý den se konala tady ve velkém sále. Probrali jsme tam všechna důležitá témata. Dnes dopoledne jsme se o tom bavili s odborníky a s našimi hosty tady trošku za zavřenými dveřmi, nebyla to veřejná akce, ale bylo to sdílení té problematiky, řešení těch problémů v různých městech. Byla to zajímavá kombinace: Praha, Stockholm, Kodaň, Sheffield a Olomouc, takže byl to takový ten náznak toho vtipu, když se potká Rus, Pražák, Holanďan a tak dále. Ale bylo to moc zajímavé a bylo skvělé tyhle věci sdílet. Já jsem slyšel nějakou kritiku, že nezajímá lidi, jak to funguje někde jinde, že zajímá, jak to budeme řešit tady. A uvidíme. Můžete se ptát, jak se ty řešení, které uvidíte, můžou aplikovat tady v Praze. Protože naši hosté jsou převážně z Anglie, a potom tady máme i dva ze Švédska, tak teďka začnu mluvit anglicky a vy můžete použít ty sluchátka, která jste si tam vzali. Potom, až budeme klást ty dotazy, tak můžete mluvit anglicky i česky. Máme tady překladatele. So, I will switch to English. First, I would like to introduce our guests. First speaker is Ian Clark from England. Ian is Sustainable Drainage System Manager in Taunton, and he will speak about green-blue infrastructure development in Taunton. Next speaker, also from England, is Kevin Barton. He's a Sustainable Drainage System Designer and Landscape Architect at Robert Bray Associates, and he will speak about role of rainwater management. Third guest from England is Roger Nowell. Sustainable Drainage System Officer at Sheffield City Council, and he will speak about Project Grey to Green in Sheffield. And finally, Kent Friedel and Martin Vysoký from Edge Consultancy Company, Sweden. Okay, now I will give mic to Ian Clark and ask him for his presentation.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here in your lovely city of Prague. Enjoying it very much, especially the weather. Not quite like this in England. It's about 8 degrees and raining, I think, at the moment. So this is the best place to be. I live in Taunton, which is about the 20th the size, 5% the size of Prague. So I'm a country boy, but the principles of green infrastructure are very similar. And Taunton, if you don't know it, which you probably won't, is famous for cricket, which is one of those eccentric English games, for cider, which some of you might have drunk, and for orchards, and a few other things as well. So I'm going to talk about green infrastructure, and the first part of it is talking about the broad strategy, and the second part is looking at some of the projects that I've helped to develop. And for those of you who don't know what green infrastructure is, this is what the Landscape Institute definition is, which is a network of natural and semi-natural features of green spaces, rivers and lakes that intersperse and connect villages, towns and cities. And the important thing is, when they're appropriately planned, designed and managed, green infrastructure has the potential to deliver a wide range of benefits. And I think that's what we're after. We're after those benefits. And they help provide sustainable transport links, mitigation and adaptation to the effects of climate change. So if it can do all that, it's doing a very good job. And basically, it's a fairly simple thing. There are kind of tools that we use to achieve that. There are the attractors, the things that get people out and about, but there are also the kind of benefits that we're hoping to achieve as well. And for example, this is part of my morning walk, and there's a footpath cycleway. There's the canal there, which is an old waterway that was used to transport goods between Taunton and Bridgewater. But interestingly, the canal also acts as an overflow. If there's too much water in the river, then it flows into this, and it's about 20 kilometers long. So it holds a lot of flood water. It's like a flood basin. As well as that, it's also a wildlife corridor and a recreational feature as well. So contained within a very small strip of land, there are a lot of kind of features that are part of green infrastructure. And I think that's one of the things that I've understood as I've worked more closely with green infrastructure. And that is that it is not enough just to have a footpath or a cycleway, but you've got to be able to combine those. And if you can combine them, then in a much smaller space, much denser space, you can achieve a lot more. And we live in a world which is getting more populated, so that we have to work harder. Some of the attractors, we all go to college, school, university at some point or other. We work, go to the shops. So those are some of the attractors. But there are more, going out, enjoying the countryside, the fresh air that comes with that, going out with friends, enjoying the arts. And it can be going out to a local park for a cup of tea, meet your friends, be by the river, enjoy the kind of wildlife, enjoy the amenity of it. Because most people these days work in offices and have a nice environment. It might be in the office, a few plants or something like that. It's that connection to nature that is very important as well. And if you can get that connection, that's part of your kind of well-being. And if you can do that in a situation with your friends, there's the kind of social benefits as well. So health and well-being, you're out and about enjoying fresh air. And however nice a city like Prague is, there's the kind of pollution that goes with cities. You need to get out there and enjoy the fresh air. Reduce flooding, I talked about that in terms of the canal and the way that that can work. Climate change adaptations, there's lots of ways that trees provide shading. They help to cool the pavements, the spaces that we work and enjoy. The increased social interaction. That's one thing. If you're driving a car, fair enough, you might have kind of friends or family with you, so you're kind of talking. But a lot of the time, you might be driving alone. And as soon as you do that, you're kind of isolated. But if you get out, you're walking, you're on footpaths, cycleways, then there's that chance for social interaction. And we've got 2 dogs here tonight, which is very nice. And dogs are fantastic. Whenever dogs pass each other, they don't just pass, walk by. They kind of talk to each other, they communicate. And I think that is one of the things that we could really learn a lot from dogs, and that is that social interaction. And fair enough, you don't want to speak to everyone that you pass in Prague, but there is an element of that. So that, and I can bet that when you go out with a dog, you kind of meet people and you chat to them and so on. So I think they're great things. Wildlife connectivity. The bees, lots of kind of wildlife are under stress caused by human beings normally. And so if we can provide wildlife corridors for insects, for wildlife, that's got to be a good thing. And ultimately, we want a life that's sustainable. And it's fantastic that so many kind of teenagers, children have been out and about, and they've been saying, look, it's no good just giving us promises. We want action. We want something to happen. Because for me, I'm kind of older, but so I'm sure the world will be here in 20 years' time. But you do start to wonder about the kind of longer term. So that's where we really got to look at sustainability in a much more precise way. And so some of the key projects that we've been developing in the Taunton area are planting up, this is a community woodland. It looks a bit like a graveyard at the moment, but there are trees in those tubes. And there will eventually be sort of 20-meter trees. And understand your present mayor is very keen to plant a lot of trees, 1 million trees. And basically about every hectare of land that you've got, you can plant 1,000 trees. So it's not so difficult to imagine that you could plant 1,000 hectares of trees. It's all doable. And fair enough, you want some of the trees in the urban areas, it's not so easy to plant them there. But these are great places for people to meet, have picnics, and meet their friends, walk the dogs. I've been really inspired by this group because one of the things I would stress is it's not just about the officers who work for the local authority, for the council, but it's about everybody to get out there and say what they really want to achieve. And we've got an amazing group of cyclists who they are very keen to improve the facilities that we have for cycling in Taunton. And they've come up with this underground map which shows the routes. The blue routes are the routes that are good to cycle. The orange routes are the not so good ones, and the red ones are ones to be avoided. And as soon as you do something like that, then you can start to see, okay, there's areas there that need to be linked up. So then in terms of the resources of the council, these guys are getting onto the council saying, look, there's an area here, we really need to improve the way that this is working. And sometimes it's not such a big job, it's just that someone hasn't thought about it particularly. Might just be putting an extra cycle lane in. So things like that are quite easy to do. Talked about getting out into the open countryside, the fresh air that comes with it. We're working on routes. There's a heritage feature here, which is a monument to one of our great army leaders, Wellington. And it's funny in England because everyone's got their own history, their own things that they represent and think are important. But from my point of view, the important thing is not that monument, but it's an attraction. It's something that people can head for. They can go there. And there are lots of obstacles to it. There's a motorway, which is the blue strip, but fortunately there are tunnels underneath. And then it's a question of improving the way that people understand how they can get there, the signage. But it's also about improving the surfaces as well, the gates that people have to go through. Some of the heritage features. Going back not that long ago, 150 years ago, water was vital for the engineering and it provided power. And these days, it's an amenity area. It's a good place for fish, it's a good place for otters, a good place for kingfishers, and it's a great place for people to meet. So we've been improving ways that people can get there. One thing that I've found is very good in terms of engaging with communities is working with artists. And artists come in lots of different guises, from sculptors to performance artists and visual artists, and is trying to engage the spaces where you've got open spaces, piazzas. I don't know Prague well enough to know how the art scene works, but there are always opportunities to get people to interact, to come out, to enjoy those spaces. This one is we call it the Green Cathedral, and it's living willow. So every year you have to go there and prune it. So it's a living structure. And there have been marriages there, and people have picnics. There are teenagers, I think they're teenagers, come along and burn some of the benches every now and again, but we go back and we replace them. And it floods from time to time. It's part of a bigger flood attenuation area. But just having the artists do that provides another attractor, enlivens the spaces where we live and work. And one of the ideas I'm very excited about is we're a garden town in Taunton, and we're developing this app and website, and it's a Garden Town Explorer. And basically it's lots of layers of information, a sort of mapping system. And so it'll map wildlife, it'll map where artists are. But one of the things I think would be really good is to map the play areas. And some of the play areas, I think there are about 50 play areas within the Taunton urban area. Some of them are very kind of simple. They have 2 or 3 bits of equipment, not very exciting. But other ones I've got a lot more exciting things going on. And so the mapping layer will show you exactly where those features are. It'll show you what features are there. But there'll be a bit like on TripAdvisor, which I'm sure you've used at some point or other. You can value it, give it 5 stars, 1 star, etc. And so it's great from parents and children's point of view, because they can check out and see where the best places to go are. But also from the council point of view, it shows that if it's getting 1 star on a regular basis, it's like, well, what's the point of having it there? You'd be better off either improving it or moving it somewhere else. So I think once you embrace technology, and we are a small town, I'm sure you've got things like that already in Prague, but for a small town, it's quite a big step. And another aspect of it is that we've through the community, created orchard areas so people can go and pick fruit. And there's going to be a map of Taunton which shows you where you can go and pick fruit. So it might be a fig tree that's up against a wall somewhere. It might be apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees. And so there's the benefit of putting people in touch with kind of wildlife, with nature. And I think that's one of the most important things. You could say in some ways that I think it's that lack of connection with nature, with the planet, that has led to this situation now. If you kind of knew that by spewing all that smoke and all that pollution into the air, that you were damaging the planet, you'd think about it twice. So that connection to nature and to wildlife is one of the most important things that that we can do. And with all kind of projects and new things, there are various challenges out there. One of them is the commitment and community involvement. So being able to work with partners, listen to what they're saying, understand what they're saying, and then try to work with it and commit yourself to, if you say you're going to do something, commit yourself to it. The partnerships, we work with lots of stakeholders, with charities that are interested in the canal, boating, interested in wildlife, cycling, etc. Funding is always a bit of a problem, but maybe with your tree planting for the time being, you're okay, because the mayor is keen to plant trees, so you can do that. And linked to politics, possibly, it's important to have a community champion, someone who you can go to for the projects and say, look, we want to do this. How are we going to achieve it? And you need someone who's got that, who can speak to the politicians and who can be enthusiastic, because with the best will in the world, I'm with the council for a short period of time, but the community are there all the time, and hopefully the community champion is there as well. And keeping the projects alive is something that, say for example with the Garden Town Explorer, the play areas, if you're getting that feedback, then that's keeping the whole thing live. So it's just a short introduction to the work that we've been doing, but I think if we want to achieve some of the benefits of GI, we have to be able to provide those tools, the cycleways, the footpaths, the wildlife corridors. And by providing those attractions and the means to get there, we can get people to get out of their cars and provide incentives and make it easy for people to get out there and use the features that we're provided. So, the kuya.
Great. Thank you. Do you have any immediate questions for Mr. Clark? Anybody? No? Okay, so we can continue with Kevin Barton. It's all yours.
I'm amplified here. Is that coming through? Yes. Well, thanks for turning out this evening to listen to us talking about what we're very enthusiastic about. I'm from a team of practice of 7 landscape architects in Stroud in the west of England. We do a lot of work throughout the UK, but particularly at the moment a lot in London. And just like most landscape architects, we specialise in green infrastructure and public realm design, schools, things like that. But all our projects have this other element of managing rainwater in the landscape as well. And that's something that we feel is inseparable from landscape design. We feel every landscape should be managing water just as another function of what that landscape does on top of everything else we design as landscape architects. In the UK, we call that SUDS, or Sustainable Drainage Systems, which is a really unfortunate name because it's not very inspiring. So if you mention that to someone at a party, either they will say, well, either they will just turn away and not talk to you for the rest of the evening, or they will say, well, what's unsustainable about conventional drainage? What's unsustainable about what we do now? Oh, okay. Okay. I'll repeat that all again in Czech. No, I won't. No. Sorry. How you doing? How's that? Yeah, is it good up there? Is that good? Can you hear me? No? No? Should we swap? It's not this channel, it's not this one, is it? Sounds from the street. No. Should we try the other one? There's someone walking around with another microphone somewhere in Prague, and it's just it's like the sketch. What's that film where the guy goes out to the toilet with his microphone on it? We've got a channel issue. Okay.
Se napojili na místní rozhlasové vysílání.
Shall I swap back to the other headset that was working? Yeah. Can we just stop the other presentation in the other room? I would dance, but that's even worse than my check. Yeah, hands up who thinks we should leave Europe. Well, it's not even 50-50 like it was. Hands up who thinks we're stupid for voting to leave Europe. What am I doing wrong? Oh, here we go. Right. So, rain. The problem with rain is either, do it this way around, there's not enough. So I think you've experienced that recently. We have this in the UK as well. Drought situation, so lots of things die off and trees get stressed. Also, that causes us problems in urban environments with urban heat island effect. Or there's too much of it. And we get flooding, like we got in 2007, where this town became effectively an island. And sometimes it's coming down so fast that our sewer systems can't cope, so we get flooding in our streets, sometimes in our homes. And particularly in older cities, we have old sewer networks where we mixed rainwater and foul sewage in the same pipes. And when it's not raining, they can cope, and they take that sewage to a sewage treatment works. But often, because we are increasingly developing our urban environment, it puts a lot more stress on these old sewers, And this happens in the UK. This is called a combined sewer overflow event. But basically what happens, there are these valves. So when there's too much rain in the system, a mixture of rain and sewage just flows out into our streams and rivers. So that's a source of pollution to our waterways, which is something we get very upset about. Another source of pollution is actually something we're all responsible for. We drive around our cities, and on our roads and car parks, pollution is building up every day wherever we drive. We are dropping oils, fuels, so we've got hydrocarbons, very toxic materials. We have heavy metals falling off car bodywork, off our brake discs and engine parts, and our tires wear down. Every day we drive, we lose a little bit of our tires, and that's a microplastic, and it builds up as a dust on the surface of the roads, and gets washed into streams and rivers. In Norway, they did a study to look at their sources of microplastic in the marine environment. That's microplastics that enter the marine environment as a microplastic, rather than litter, which slowly breaks down to microplastic. And this included things like painting and maintenance of ships and boats and actual plastic production itself. Things we might have heard about, like washing our plastic clothing, and the one right at the end, the little microbeads in our cosmetics. But if you add up all those other domestic and industrial producers of marine microplastic, they still don't add up to the wear and tear from car tires from our urban environments. And then the other issue is heat. Particularly in summer, our urban surfaces warm up, and then when it rains on them, that rain also warms up. And the warmer that water is, the less oxygen it can carry dissolved in the water. And so what happens, this happened in summer after a few weeks without any rain. So the longer we have between rainfall events, the more pollution builds up, because the more time it's had to build up. And then particularly if in summer you have a few weeks without rain, with this pollution building up, the surfaces are nice and warm, and then you get a small rainfall event, so it doesn't have to be very big. What you get hitting the rivers is low oxygen, highly polluted, warm water. And this is the kind of level of destruction. So this happens in London regularly, a number of times every year. We kill thousands of fish, and for all those thousands of fish we can see there's billions of microbes and other very important biodiversity in that river that's killed off. So these are very morally, these are kind of very morally compelling reasons why we engage with trying to find solutions to it. And really the solution is we're trying to emulate nature. So we're not trying to make our urban environments woodlands and forests, but we're trying to look at the qualities of how nature manages rain, because we do it so differently. So in nature, what we find is actually most of the rain that lands on a natural landscape is either evaporated or transpired by plants. If it does get through to the sort of forest canopy or the sort of natural landscape floor, it then tends to soak into the ground, enters deep into sort of aquifers and our geology, may start traveling across the surface eventually and start filling up ponds and wetlands and little what we call ephemeral ponds, temporary ponds, where depressions in the landscape fill up with water, and might very slowly migrate their way through soils and through geology to streams and rivers. And what we see in the natural landscape is then very few flows at the surface. So these tiny little arrows at the top indicating that actually what we see traveling over the surface is very minimal, and there's also a huge delay before that happens. So after a rainfall event, there are huge delays for the rain that lands on that landscape. Most of it is lost, and then what does make its way to streams and rivers does so very slowly. In the urban environment, this could almost be Prague, just try and imagine. You have nicer buildings and nicer paving and more Skodas, but apart from that, it could be Prague. In this urban environment, it behaves very, very differently. So we've paved all our surfaces. We have taken away all the opportunity for water to be lost into the ground. We have much less vegetation, so we have much less transpiration of water up into the air. And what we see is a reversal of all those arrows. So we've stolen water from the ground, we've stolen water from the air, so we have much bigger volumes now, rushing more at the surface, either as surface flow or in our surface sewers, going straight to streams and rivers. And so what we see is a really intense rainfall event landing on an urban environment very quickly delivers a really intense burst of water into our streams and rivers or sewers, and they just can't cope with that pattern of water. And what we need to do is ask our urban environments to behave very differently. So we need to ask them to behave hydraulically much more like the natural environment. We need to ask them to work a lot harder. Every surface of the urban environment, we need to challenge it to work harder with rainwater. So that we can reverse those arrows back again, so that we can maximize evapotranspiration, maximize losses into the ground. And we need our urban environments to act like a sponge. So we may have heard the term sponge cities, they call it in China. And our landscapes, we try and create sponges with our landscapes. And just to sort of demonstrate one of these projects and the impact that this design can have, that it's not something that we feel detracts in any way from the landscapes we design. It adds another very important functionality, but along with that, we feel it also brings qualities to space. This is a before photo, by the way. I'm not talking. This is before we did any work to this. So I'm using this as an example to show actually how not only can managing water not detract from the functionality, beauty of spaces, but it can actually bring extra qualities that we get really, really excited about. So this street in a very deprived part of London called White City, it's the lowest 4% in England for the sort of deprivation index. There's a school on the left-hand side, and there's two parks on the right-hand side, lots of parked cars each side, and at school in the morning, in the afternoon, school drop-off and pick-up time, this was awful. It was hell. Everybody, even though they lived locally, used to drive their children to school, get as close as they could to the school gates, which is almost invisible just here, this tiny little gate that went into the school. They would ignore the lines saying don't park here. They would get as close as they can, kick their kid out of the car, and then fight all the other drivers to get back out again. And that led to a lot of pollution. It made this road very dangerous to cross. So that was a vicious cycle. So people were then even more inclined to drive because that felt like the safest thing to do. So it didn't work socially. It wasn't a healthy or a safe route to school, and the local community wanted to change that. Now, luckily for them, this council, Hammersmith and Fulham Council, had, which is one of the boroughs in London, they had argued against London building a super sewer to solve the water issues in the city. And so politically, they were looking for a project to demonstrate the alternatives. So they felt that they should have been spending those billions of pounds on projects like I'm about to show you, which was correct, they should have done. So luckily for this community, the council wanted a project. So we kind of had two clients. They had very different needs. The council was trying to demonstrate water management, alternative water management ideas. The community weren't particularly interested in that because they didn't have the flooding. The flooding is somewhere else that we're stopping. The water quality issues will be a river somewhere else that they may not visit. So they weren't particularly getting the benefits from the water management side of it. So it's very important for us that we consider both creating this space that responds to the community needs at the same time as managing water. This was the only feature really of interest on the site, this low wall. And I spoke to these mums, and they remember walking on that wall to school. And their kids are walking on this school, on this wall. And this was the only thing in our brief, really, that from the communities, they wanted to keep this wall. And our client was very clear, you must keep the wall. This is the only important feature. But when I spoke to the community about the wall, I said, I had a little go on it. I said, it's a very nice wall, but it's quite straight, isn't it? It's not very interesting. And I said, well, what if we give you a much more interesting wall to walk on? We keep a wall, but it's just a bit wiggly, and it goes through plants and trees, and sometimes there might be a little bit of water on each side to make it more interesting. And they were almost tearing down the wall, ready for my ideas. So we did much like most landscape architects would do. We look at the sort of character of the space, the sort of ingredients we might put in here, the benefits to people and wildlife. Nothing particularly, well, there's a few sort of water management features in there. But we're really considering, we always consider the water management in tandem with everything else we do as a landscape architect, all those other considerations of people, place, and wildlife. Water is just another one of those we consider completely simultaneously. We came up with the concept design, concept ideas of how we might manage the water off the school roofs, the hard surfaces themselves, trying to steal water from as many adjacent roofs as we could to maximize the impact of our scheme. And right through the very early concept ideas, these early sectional sketches, we're looking at how we can create some visual connection between the school and the playground, make this a dynamic, playful, family-orientated space, at the same time as we're thinking how water might be part of that, how we can take water off a roof and actually bring it overhead. The opportunity is that water is higher on a roof, and so we can bring it overhead and drop it into the center of the space in really interesting ways. Fill up basins where we have the sort of wall feature and bridges, so people can interact with these features that occasionally have water in and see them fill up when it rains. So these more sort of developed sketches, you can see we're looking at what these ingredients might look like. Some of these are just about placemaking, connectivity, new gateways into the playground. But then we're also looking at the idea of the basin with the wall running through it and these sort of water features coming down. And this is what we produced. So most of this landscape is managing water directly where it lands. The only bit that isn't is the car park, because that was it was cut out by our client for cost reasons. But ideally, that would have been a permeable surface, like the whole rest of the paved area is permeable paving. So it's cleaning water where it lands and managing and slowing that flow. This is a rain garden in the foreground. Ideally, would have been able to put a green roof on this school, but the flimsy roof wouldn't take it. So instead, we brought the water out on this sculptural channel and dropped it into this rain garden. You can see the slightly depressed, sunken landscape area here, filled with these ornamental plants. And you can just see the wiggly wall disappearing through the main basin there. And now we have a fun, adventurous, playful route to school, which just about every kid follows. And you can actually see on the previous slide, we did try and encourage children to come into the school entrance is pretty much where I'm stood here underneath me taking the photo. And we did try and loop this line, because kids can't help but follow a line in the landscape. And we did that, we created this ribbon all the way through the landscape for children to follow. And it went through some of these suds basins. But this loop kind of came to the school entrance to try and encourage them to kind of go into school rather than just carry on to the far end. And this planting is very specific to water management. We use a lot of herbaceous plants and grasses that have continual coverage of vegetation and roots to encourage infiltration into the soil. And they're also very tolerant of drought conditions in the summer. There's another view of the rain sculpture. So this is an example of how we can actually start exploiting the flow of water. If we're managing rain, we can actually play with it in the landscape and make interesting things happen. So we like to talk about our landscapes coming alive when it rains. So at the very least, we see areas that are sometimes dry fill up with rain when it rains. When we can, we like to do interesting things like this sculpture. So in the middle here, so we've got these Corten leaves holding this channel up, these grass leaves. But in the middle, there's a helix of stainless steel ropes, which I think there's about 16 ropes, and they curve around and they're spread out at the base, and they're kind of locked in at the bottom of the rain garden. And when the rain falls down that channel, it passes down these wires, and when they meet in the middle and then spread out again, you get these films of water spread between the steel ropes, and they kind of dance up and down as the surface tension breaks, and you get this amazing visual effect. And we also like to say that we like the idea that people might go outside when it rains, or even look out the window when it rains, because of things like this that we do. And actually at this school, the staff and the children do go out when it rains to see this happen. And last time I was there, a little boy came along to show his mum when it was raining, and he said, "Oh, it's not really happening at the moment. Let's come back later if it rains heavier." And he knew that, and so he's starting to engage with the type of rainfall events that make things happen in this landscape. And that reconnection with nature, as Ian was saying, is really something that there's a massive opportunity for us to do here. And what's been great about this project is it's won awards. It's got the engineering awards for the water management side of what the landscape is doing. But it's also won these Landscape Institute awards for the placemaking and the benefits to the community. So it's made a massive difference to this community. You can see the visible difference in terms of we've taken away that dangerous route to school, we've made a healthy and safer route to school. But we've also created a space that the community hold events in. They hold markets and fairs. I spoke to one mum about 6 months after this was finished, and when I go there, I speak to people, I don't tell them who I am, so that I get the raw truth about what they think about the place. And I spoke to this mum and said, what do you think of this landscape? And she was describing how it used to be, how she used to drive to school, even though she lived very close. She would drive to school, and she described how it was hell and everybody hated each other and would swear at each other and stick fingers up at each other because they were getting in the way of each other driving their cars. And she says, but now I can't drive to school. You've stopped me, but I don't mind because we like walking to school now. And she said, and actually what has happened is the parents actually get there 10 or 15 minutes earlier now, and they hang out in this space, and they talk to each other, and they've started making friends. So they've gone from enemies in cars to actually making friends with each other. And then she said something which I just couldn't have scripted better myself, which in a way was, if we had a single mission statement, this is what it would have been. She said, you know, this landscape's actually started to bring the community together. And, sorry, this happened then as well. I said, thank you very much, walked away, and I cried a lot. Because, you know, for us, that's a big part. That's, as landscape architects, that's what we want to do. We want to create spaces that are so beneficial for people, so beneficial for wildlife. And for us, the water management can really help that. This project happened because there was a need to do something different with water. And there's huge opportunities for that within any city. So yeah, I think I'll stop there probably before I get too emotional. Yeah, and it got very good feedback from the client on that project as well. Yeah, more of the same, and hopefully projects like this in Prague. Thank you. Please ask me a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Yeah, there. I'll give you a mic. Sorry, yeah, we have a mic for you for record.
You showed us the picture of this construction that redirects water from the roof into the green sort of box. You have maybe a picture how it looks like when it rains, actually, because I think that could be.
Yeah, yes, I did have. This is a PDF version of the presentation, so I haven't got. I had a little video. I just have to describe it to you, and I wish we put a light in the bottom because then it would have made it even more sort of spectacular. But yeah, it's like dancing water. So the people in the school described the water. It's like the water goes upwards because you get this film. You know how water stretches between things like a bubble, but then it kind of breaks in an instant and sort of zips up. So you've got a series of these things dancing up and down. I'll have to put a video somewhere on our website. You can have a look.
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will check your website. Another question? Someone? Yeah, here.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. And one question, what would be the maintenance cost?
So what you can see there is all landscape elements. So wherever possible, we use the normal sorts of features you would expect to see in a landscape to manage water. So we're trying to avoid things that would involve difficult maintenance or costly maintenance. And this whole landscape can be maintained by the normal council teams. So the paving just needs regular sweeping. Maybe probably in this landscape, maybe 15 years' time, you might need to go through with that same sweeper and turn the suction up to suck the grit out the joints of the permeable paving and just brush in some new grit. That's probably about the most difficult item of maintenance that this landscape needs in something like 15 or 20 years' time. The rest of it is just trimming and cutting back of plants once a year and ongoing weeding. And what's very interesting about this project, in the UK, our maintenance budgets are getting cut and cut all the time. So council clients are adamant that we try and minimize the maintenance costs. And to our mind now, that's got to a point where the system is broken. They're now asking for zero maintenance on landscapes, but they want all the qualities. They want all the good things that landscapes deliver, but with no maintenance. It's just not possible. There has to be some maintenance. And so what happened on this project is we wanted to find another model. And we were always looking for opportunities that the community could be involved in this project to have a sense of ownership and look after this project. And we felt that maintenance was a great opportunity because 2 minutes around the corner was a charity who had a garden around the corner where they take school children and disabled children and underprivileged children to work with plants and animals. And we thought they might be interested in having some involvement in looking after this because it was in their community. And they were, and they priced it. They put in a bid to the council. And the council also then asked their maintenance teams how much it would cost to manage this landscape. And they were cheaper. The local gardening charity were cheaper. And not only are they cheaper, they're much more skilled. They're on the doorstep. They walk through it every day, so they know when things need doing. And they get local community members. They get children involved. They get people from large banks and big businesses come and do volunteer days in this community where they would never normally set foot, and give something back to a very needy community. So actually, the end result was cheaper than the council being able to maintain it themselves. And quite often you find you're changing the maintenance. So we've reduced the amount of sort of road infrastructure, but we've replaced it with green infrastructure. So the maintenance is just different. What we don't have is any gullies to empty, and your sort of normal road maintenance has gone.
Thank you. I have to say it would be really brave to say no to car in Prague.
Non to car.
Yeah, no to cars.
No to cars.
Yeah, I don't allow them to ride somewhere. I can't imagine I will write it on our Facebook. It will be storm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And last presentation from England, Mr. Roger Noble.
It's definitely working. I can hear myself getting up there, struggling out of my chair. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to talk this evening. I work in the municipality of Sheffield in the flood and water management team. So we deal with flood programs to reduce the flood risk, new development, promoting sustainable drainage. I'm just going to talk about some of our experiences in Sheffield about blue-green infrastructure, some of the projects we've delivered and some we're planning on delivering. I'm a landscape architect by training, but I've found myself in the sort of water engineering world, mixing with engineers every day, which is quite a challenge. But just a bit about Sheffield briefly. It's, you can see on the map there, we're halfway up England, in Yorkshire, about 500,000 population. And we're right up against the Pennine Hills that run north and south up the UK. We're really right at the top of the catchment. Unlike you, you're quite down with a big river here. We're right at the top. And we're lucky also because there's a national park here. So half of Sheffield is almost in national park. So it's quite a nice green city. And that's the origin of Sheffield, is the potential energy of water falling from the hills into the valleys. It's harnessing that energy, and that's the origin of generating, controlling the river for water wheels. So Sheffield's been the centre of sharpening tools from size in the agricultural revolution through to cutlery. It was the cutlery capital of the world, spoons, forks, knives. So that's the origin. So we have hundreds of these weirs and old water mills. And we're still doing some steel today, even though the demise of the industry is fairly heavy as well. But Sheffield is these big valleys. We've got about 7 main rivers that have been harnessed and lots of smaller rivers. And great connectivity of open spaces, some of them along the river corridors. So the green space is really important. 10% of the city is woodland, so quite a wooded city as well. And that outdoor thing is something we've pushed more and more, the outdoor economy. So this is the edge of Sheffield. This is the capital, really, of climbing for the UK. We've got many, many kilometres of climbing edges right on the edge of Sheffield. And obviously walking, cycling as well. So we're trying to capture that whole connectivity between the city and the outer edges. And obviously these areas of talent, keeping talent, people who want to stay in Sheffield, trade, obviously businesses and tourism as well. So the green elements are really important, but it has been a struggle, and we have had massive cuts, like all authorities across the UK. So we've had to be clever. So parks where we've been mowing them with big mowers, hang on, we could change that. We could plant trees, we could let them go to grassland, we could use them for growing food, and also wetlands. And we're doing all this. It's called our Urban Nature Parks program. We're actually changing our parks, which reduces the cost, but gains the benefit. Woodland and grassland help also runoff as well. But this is the rivers, the big blue-green elements of the city. This is the rivers in the 70s, polluted, an absolute liability. Fortunately, we've got on top of pollution, and now the river is an asset, and we've created access by the river, incrementally creating more and more connectivity, so the rivers become visible and an asset to the city for recreation. but they're an important starting point for looking at blue-green overall. But look at, this is what happens. You buy a river, you're also subject to flooding. 2007 was our big flood year, and it was a big flood year throughout the UK. And it was a wake-up call, really, to the government to start to look at how we address these problems with funding. And just some of the headline figures: 6,000 homes at flood risk, and this is what we're trying to address. Businesses, obviously incredibly important for the economy that we reduce the flood risk to encourage development. But obviously also here, transforming our waterways. Can we think creatively about how we do that? Can we get other benefits at the same time, like biodiversity, recreation? It brings in other money as well. So being creative. Just some of the examples here. We're looking at this park, which is one of the most popular parks, but it's right on the river. Can we use that park and modify it to hold water, hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of water, allow the river to flood into there, hold back, and basically this floods the railway station in the worst events. So we're trying to reduce that as a key transport hub. And using wetlands as well. We've got plans for using wetlands on farmland in the big fields in Valley Bottoms to slow that flow. This is one that I produced probably about 5-6 years ago, which is one of the first flood defences for the Don. You can see the flooding in the bottom corner there. Somebody died around the corner. It was a fast-flowing, deep river. So this was trying to be creative with flood defences. It's not always just shove a wall up. You know, we're trying to reduce the walls. That's the traditional default. We build a wall, keep the river out. This is just trying to be more creative with walls, integrating it with green space, access to the river, trying to make an asset at the same time. This is another one where we had flood problems. The river was restricted by the culvert. It goes underground, it's canalised. We've ripped that out and created now a complete open space down to the river where people can relax and enjoy it. The river becomes an asset to the city. And this is part of a whole new network, again, we're creating along this small river that runs through this part of the city. It increases land value as well. Just to say, we're starting to look outside the city. How do you keep rain from coming into the city on those river systems, holding the flow back, looking at the whole rural environment around Sheffield, and a variety of ideas, creating wetlands and ponds within farmland, creating woody dams, planting woodland. Woodland obviously intercepts rain, like Kevin was saying, intercepts in the canopies, promotes infiltration. That can really improve the catchment response and take the peak off rivers. So this is the macro blue-green, if you would like, outside the city. Just briefly talk about this project that I was involved with from just before 2000. This is a new park in a very difficult area socially. Lots of housing had been demolished because it's in such poor condition. And this was trying to build a park, a place that for 25,000 people. They didn't have a park, but it was abused, massive amounts of car racing, stolen cars every weekend. I'd come and clear those away. So it was really problematic. And this is a multi-year project. So it's still happening, but it was about teasing out the green infrastructure that was there. It was just filled with cars and rubbish and arse and burning, and it was an awful place and dangerous. So it's a matter of teasing out the green infrastructure and framing that as something that's been cared for. And so that's the semi-natural vegetation that we're trying to bring back to life by, and the water as well. This was filled with rubbish, this stream, literally meters of rubbish within a channel. So the blue becoming a positive asset. But also taking opportunities from development. This is housing being built, new housing next to the park, and building of features to manage that the water, control the flow so it doesn't exacerbate flooding further down, and deal with the treatment of the runoff from the road. So there it is, same view in 2007, that flood year, holding that flow in that park, many hundreds and hundreds of cubic meters of water, and it's an asset to the park. It seems a very obvious thing to do, really. So what we've actually done is now taken that learning from that project into all the other, you can see these coloured blobs, thousands of houses we're building, and we've taken that learning and saying, well, let's do the same again. It's absolutely obvious, open space SUDS, I'm calling it. it improves the viability. These are difficult areas to build houses in. They've lain derelict and cleared for probably a decade and a half, 15 years, because the cost to build a house is the same as what you'd sell it for. There's no profit. It's so difficult to build these houses because they fetch so little money because of the nature of the area. So improving viability, it's cheaper to put water in a park than burying it underground. We have to control these flows off these developments to reduce flooding. But one option, and the typical option, is to bury water in engineered structures. Very expensive. Going into a park, using the landscape, it improves the economic context for the housing. So that's probably, in some of these cases, a £2 million saving. That's probably €2.5 million saving on some of these developments. But it creates these new landscapes as well for recreation, for biodiversity, and it brings money into open spaces because they're now providing this service of water management. So just a few slides of schemes that have gone in really relatively recently on parks, just holding water in different situations. This one is holding about 6,000 cubic meters from 7 hectares of housing, a series of wetlands and channels. So this is now going to be maturing over the next year, but that's a huge saving for those developments. And I should just say, all these developments, each household is paying only about £20, so about €22 a year for all the services of managing this water on these parks. It's a small amount of money, but it gives us income forever to look after these facilities. Just a retrofit SUDs, that's SUDs going into existing urban areas, not new development, but actually going in. This is a pedestrianisation at the university, you know, taking the opportunity. We want some greenery. Well, let's make it blue at the same time. Why not? It seems obvious. So we've explored this with the water company. We have private water companies in England, and it's really difficult working with a profit-making organisation. But we're examining the whole sewer system for the city. Where are the problems where you might get surface flooding or more pollution, like Kevin was talking about, the combined sewer overflows, polluting watercourses. There's a lot of that in Sheffield. How can we pull the flow using those sort of retrofit SUD schemes in the street scene? I'm going to talk about Grey to Green, and that's the title I know in my presentation, but this is our flagship retrofit SUDs. It's the one that's kind of making people see that you can do this. Yes, it's a high profile setting, but you know, the principles are all there. This is the city centre of Sheffield. Briefly talk about some of the ideas. We've got these routes, these coloured routes, the gold route and the steel route, as they're called. These are kind of routes of improvement in the public realm to get more quality to the city. So there's you can read the city as you go through it, and it's very clear where you're going from the railway station here up through the main part, and different zones of the city, like the cultural industry quarter, the retail quarter, hang around those routes. The purple route is the Grey to Green route, and that's really emerged because at the top of the slide, we actually moved the traffic out of the city centre. There was a huge flow along that purple route of most of the traffic going towards the main motorway for Sheffield. And it was right, really, in the heart of the city. So they chose to move that traffic to the north. But what that did was leave all this obsolete roadways running through this area. Lots of tarmac. You can see there's not a lot of traffic on there because that's the reality. Most of it's been moved out. This is used by the odd bus now or taxis. But it does no favours to this area. It's ugly. It's got railings, can't get across the road. And, you know, we have buildings like, this is the law courts for Sheffield. We have high-profile businesses, government offices, lots of new development land as well. And this was doing nothing to this area in terms of promoting it and improving it. And obviously, this is just a photo saying we wanted to move to something completely different. I'm going to talk briefly about Grey to Green now. The principles behind it is that creating a setting for investment. This is very much a regeneration project, changing the nature of an area to encourage the building out of plots, the increase in land value, and the employment and so on in that area. but saying, well, actually, could we do things, layer this up and get lots of benefits from one footprint? Can we use the new green areas for managing surface water? Could we create more cycle routes, pedestrian connectivity across the city? Could we do the planting differently? Not your standard vegetation, something that can actually provide biodiversity, as much colour through the year as possible, and quite an informal sort of vegetation. And this was where we worked with the University Landscape Department in Sheffield, where they have a lot of experience in these sorts of vegetations. But it's about reclaiming the highway, really. You know, that big tarmac spaces, creating new spaces within that landscape that are comfortable for people to be in. And the city garden is this principle that cities are changing. Certainly Sheffield struggles retail-wise. It's no longer kind of shopping only for city centres. It needs to do other things. We have out-of-town shopping centres. We need to have other attractions in cities. There's more people living in cities, in the city centre. So the horticultural excellence is something that we want to promote in the city. Here's a plan of Greater Green overall. It's about 1.2 kilometres long. The bit in the middle is the delivered bit that's been built. And the next bit is starting this month now. So we're going to have quite a substantial scheme in by the end of this year. And the SUD's idea there is this isn't necessarily a big problem of water in this area. It's saying, well, while we're doing this regeneration, we're going to take an opportunity. We're going to regret nothing. We're going to build water into these landscapes to demonstrate it. It's in effect like future-proofing. We're taking out impermeable area. We're improving the performance of drainage in that area. We're taking that flow out of the sewer, and we're taking it to the river in this case. So we're returning it to its natural route, cleaned and controlled through this system. And the art of the possible is this term, I suppose what I'll describe here is linear along the road, and it's divided into a series of cells because it falls from one end to the other, and we've effectively created lots of level spaces along this route that hold the water. And that gives you what you can deliver in terms of water benefit. You've got the contributing roads and paths, and these cells hold that water back. This is the edge of the road, no curb. Cars could just go off and people are like, blimey, that's a bit different. But actually we're convinced that this has made vehicles more cautious. But the benefit of that from a water point of view is water can just fall off the road in a big sheet. And that's great because it reduces erosion, stops the focus of water, and it gets treatment of the pollutants that Kevin was talking about all the way along this bed. So it's a much more robust method for managing that water. These are the systems going in, the planting. Each one of those walls, this is where it's quite steep, and we have to have more of these walls. But they're all holding back flow. There is flow, some going underground, but some can come over the top in the big extreme events. The 100-year plus climate change, those big events that happen very rarely. So that's that same picture establishing now. And obviously placemaking, it's absolutely done its job. People are now using it for their lunchtime sandwiches and hanging around there. It's a completely different, comfortable environment with birds singing, insects. You know, people are walking this route now to work. They've chosen this route because it's an attractive place to be. It's full of colour all the way through the year. You know, that's the sort of story that we've heard so far happening here with Greater Green. And that immersion within vegetation within the city, almost like you're in the countryside, that meadow surrounding the footpaths. The scheme really has been an overall reduction. We've had traffic lights, tarmac, all costly to look after. We've ripped a load of that away. And for this scheme, it's actually meant a reduction in the cost to look after this environment. But in terms of the maintenance, it is like Kevin was saying, that this is just cutting down once a year in winter to tidy up, because this flowers, this is autumn. It flowers all the way through, and then it's tidied up in winter. And this is proving to be very successful. It's really simple management, cutting down and just allowing that regrowth in spring with bulbs, and then on further flowering and the plants regrowing. And it's very robust for surface water management. As I say, the water just falls off the road and the highway department are going, that's great, there's no gullies to clean, there's no water ever going to be on this highway because it just falls off into this landscape. And I think the issue here is what people are saying, why has this happened in Sheffield? This is a very big SUD scheme, 1.2 kilometres long. I think it's about history, it's about the teamwork and the people working in Sheffield for many, many years and really having experience of how Sheffield functions and knowing each other and wanting to be innovative and pushing the agendas of innovation and water in particular. I've shown you the rivers. The rivers, a history of rivers and regeneration, and water is at the heart of that. So there's a keenness to, if you would like, take the risk, commit to the project, and take that long-term view. We're happy to accept there may be some unknowns here and move this into the future. I'm pleased to say Zach is the principal landscape architect. He's now, this is another scheme, so he's just going, we're going to do this everywhere now. We're going to make every green bit blue in the city centre as part of our regeneration. So that's a great story that somebody's been able to do that. And Zach didn't know any SUDS things before. He's a landscape architect, but Robert Bray Associates, where Kevin works, just gave him some advice, and that was enough for him to feel confident to move forward, because these things aren't necessarily complicated. Well, thank you very much. That's the last photo of the manor in September, still functioning 17, 18 years, and still looking good. So that's what SUDS can be, really cheap to look after. Thank you very much.
Once again, space for one question. Anybody? Yeah?
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. I wonder, can you comment on the role of this European agriculture subsidies? Because I think I watched an interview with George Monbiot. I think it was one of the parliament committees.
It's about the only...
And if I understood that the landowners, they are motivated to build these walls just to get rid of the flooding, to have the subsidies for their land, whether they practice any agriculture activity or not. Is that correct?
I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I was going to say the Brexit is about it's the only positive thing that we might be able to review our agricultural subsidies, and that could include paying for flood management by farmers. I know in some areas there is some payment happening, I think in Somerset, to some farmers for their fields to be utilised. But is that what you're getting at? Is that the example, do you think? So payments to farmers, they've always flooded and now we're actually going to pay them for flooding. Is that the issue? Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't think it's an issue we have in Sheffield, but Oh, right.
Yeah, in parts of the UK, there's subsidies to maintain agricultural landscapes.
Yeah.
As really poorly functioning hydraulic landscapes, and that caused some of the flooding in places like Northumberland, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I suppose that's where this review potentially will allow proper management for flood risk for farmers, because that's not there at the moment. That's absolutely absent, and in fact, it goes the opposite way, promoting payments per square area for grazing and intensity of agriculture. It doesn't work for the benefit of flood risk. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have to say I really like the street and the hill. It looks like a real friendly environment for birds and insects and everything. It looks like a whole biotop. It's really nice. Now we can continue with Ken Friedel and Martin Vysoký from Edge. They will prepare their mics.
Yes, works perfect.
Yeah, I'll give you a presenter.
Thank you. Okay. Dobrý večer. I will take it in English. My English is quite rather limited compared to our English friends, so it will be very simple English. I'm very happy to share these ideas with you, also with you that probably haven't been yesterday here. It's very nice to see so many people that came, and see, it's evident that this topic is very actual right now. We have several problems that we are facing. We have a problem with water quality, water quantity in our cities that results in floods. We have problem with overheating that we can very much experience during the long drought and heat waves. And then we have a problem that our urban areas leaves so much water that not so much water is captured in the cities. Another problem is that we have poor conditions for trees, that they can suffer. The soil is rather compacted, and then the tree, when it needs air, goes with the roots up and can break the surfaces, so it creates the damage also around. And then we have the problem with the silo perspective, the way how our professions that contribute to city development, they rather focus in their area of expertise without collaborating with each other. So if you look on our city, this is the city in Malmö. If you look on its cityscape, you realize that it's composed from the roofscape and from the streetscape. And where we find the most possibilities to work with our solution to address these problems, it's actually on the streetscape.
Yes, and when you are coming into the streetscapes, that's a lot of more challenges you are standing in front of. There is a lot of different infrastructure that you will need to take care of. It's not only the thing that you have above, it's a lot of cables and pipes under that you have to collaborate in some way. And also the surface can change a lot when it comes into a streetscape. Sometimes you want vegetation areas, sometimes you want parking place for bikes or for cars, sometimes you want trees with hard surface around, and sometimes you want to have a road and so on. And where you are walking in this streetscape, you must in some way can manage the stormwater and also to manage to get big root zones for our tree and other vegetation that we want to have in the streetscape. And then we was thinking, okay, is there anything that you can find everywhere in the streetscapes that you maybe can change or that you can use to store stormwater and take care of it, even if you have a low line here, or if it's a low line there, or wherever you will have the low points in your streetscapes. And then we come up with the idea that we will have a sub-base layer everywhere. And the sub-base layer is one part of this superstructure for a hard surface. So this area here, this layer here, is this sub-base layer for roads, and that you have everywhere. And normally it consists of crushed rock in the fraction from 0 up to 90 millimeters. But the problem with this material is that you have no chance to let water into it, and you have no chance to let roots in it. And then we come up with a new idea that we can see if we can change this sub-base layer to another type of material that we, instead of starting from 0, we start from around 16 millimeters and go up to 90 millimeters instead. And then we will get a porosity in this material around 40%. And that means that you can store around 400 liters per cubic meters of this open sub-base layer. So instead, we put out this open sub-base layer here, and it depends on how much you need if you only put it under plantations and between plantations, or if you go into the road, or if you go into the cycle and walking path. And then you create a layer like this with this open subbase layer. And there is another very good thing when you can now get in the water in this layer, and you also can get in the root zones, because the roots get sugar from the leaves, and one big part of this sugar will leak out in the root zone atmosphere, and that will feed the microorganisms that we have there, and they will help us with the cleaning of this stormwater that have come into the system. And then we can change and design our surface and this streetscape how we want, because it doesn't matter how we change it. We will have this layer, and we can use it for the root zone and the stormwater. And we can also travel cars above it without any problem that it will sink down. Because when we take away these fine materials, we send in it to a big lab that we build up a huge construction and try it and see what load it will manage. And it's the same, more or less, as the normal superstructure material that you use. And in a length, it will look like this. Here you have a submerged plantation. And here you have a normal plantation that you have above this open subbase layer. And then you can have a tree trench where you have the hard surface around. And it can look like this. This is a plantation above this open subbase layer. And either you can let the water in through a gravel ditch like this, so it come in here and fill up the system, or you can do like they have been doing in Graz in Austria, that they use a well, like you see here, to take in the water. It depends little how you want the streetscape should look like. Another construction that you can put on is this tree trench, where you have this hard surface around, and then you also have a well that you take in the water, and it will spread in this open subbase layer. And it can look like this. This is a picture from Stockholm, where you see this open subbase layer here. And often we also mix it with a biochar. It's a product that you produce of organic waste. And it's very good, both because it will make a better root zone for plantation, because it can hold water and nutrition. But it also help with cleaning of the water, and the microorganism likes this biochar very much, and so it's a very good environment for them, and then they will grow and will be a better community and help us even more with the cleaning. And also this will be like a carbon sink, because instead of that it goes up in our air, we take it down, and here it can be staying for thousands of years before it will break down. And then we pave it with hard surface above. And another construction you can use is the permeable pavement or permeable surface. So this hard surface here is permeable. So the water go through this, and under here we have this open subbase layer, and it's like a huge magazine that you can store water. But in the same way, it's a big root zone for the trees. So this pine tree here can very easily go out with these roots under here and get a lot of water, so it can grow very good. And another construction that is very popular now is something that we call rain garden, and it's a submerged plantation. So this plantation here is lower than the surrounding surface, so you will let water into this structure, and it should flood and be standing water here for a couple of hours before it infiltrates down to the lower layers. So it should look like this. That's the purpose with this construction, a rain garden. So when, how is this system then working when it comes to flow and where we store the volume of water? Here we have a hard surface that after the rain it starts to run off, and then it first go into this submerged plantation, the rain garden, and it will flood here, and then it starts to infiltrate down to the bottom. And if the rain continues, then it will fill up a zone in the bottom full with water, and then if it rises a little more, then it starts to continue. And depend on how you want to control it. This is a control well. So either you can send it out to the pipe system, or you can send it to the next magazine lower down the street. And if you cut a very heavy rain, when you fill up this rain garden first, and when it's full, then the water continue to this control well and go into this one, and then spread in this open subbase layer. Because normally this magazine here can store around 15 millimeters of rain, but this under magazine can store between 40 to 60 millimeters of rain. So it's a lot rain. And then when we have a dry period, we can store water in the bottom of the system, and you can rather easily change how much water you want to store, depend on how long dry periods you have. And it can look like this when it's built. And then I will show you some picture also how easy it is to build this construction, because it's one thing to draw it, but it's another thing that it also should fit into the building process. So first you go and excavate a very big hole here, and you place the stormwater pipes, the sewer pipe, the drinking pipe, and maybe the heating pipe. And then when you fill up, you form this grade where you will later build your construction. And in the future, you will have building here. This is the road, and then you will have building on the other side. And it can look like this. And here you can see this control well that we have placed. And then we fill up in the bottom with a coarse gravel layer. And in this case, we are in the protection area for water. So because of that, we needed to seal, so we can't pollute the groundwater and the drinking water. And then we fill up where we want to have our plantation with this open subbase layer combined with biochar. And then we have a finished construction road. And now we can go in and start to build the house on both sides. And you can drive with all your heavy machines everywhere, because there is no place, no construction that is standing up that you can destroy, or even where you will in the future have your plantation. It's no problem to travel with very heavy loads on it. And then you go back after you have built the house and dig a little hole and fill up with the topsoil, and then you plant this site, and then it's finished result.
So to sum up, it's quite a lot of information to process. It's a lot of pieces of puzzle that you need to connect. It takes time, but we try to sum up for you the effects of this possible alternative. And that's if we have current conditions like today, and what's possible to do. We have still this need to have parking places, to have places where the car can drive. And at the same time, we still need to address, to solve these problems. What is possible to do is that we can still have hard surfaces, but we need at least, for example, 5% more vegetation if we want to have some trees. And we want them if we want to have a good environments in these climatic extremes. Or there are situations when you don't need a really blue infrastructure. Then you can still have your hard surfaces, and you can still provide a stormwater function with using this open subbase layer. In terms of effects of the flow, we can lower the flow to this extent, so we can capture really a lot of volumes in the city. And if we capture a lot of volumes in the city, then we can decrease the risk towards flooding and decrease the damage costs. So therefore, we can increase the city resilience. We can decrease the heat by providing mainly the shade. And therefore, we can also decrease the costs for the energy. And of course, with the system, we are creating so huge root zone that the trees can spread their roots, get more air. They can get water even from the roofs. It's possible to connect it to the system. I would like to just mention that on this picture that was taken actually previous year during summertime in Malmö, where you can see our system on this kind of construction. And the trees are thriving compared to the young, older ones that already are more established. And the system is actually even prepared to take care of the grey water from washing machines, for example. In terms of effect of the purification, if you use this kind of solution, rain garden, we can filter around 80% of pollutants. And it's quite underestimated, this value, because we don't factor the vegetation that have also positive effect on capturing the pollutants. And of course, then we're actually creating possibilities to connect the silos and start collaborate with each other and exchange information with each other. Because it really needs collective city development if we want to address these problems. In terms of effects on economy, compared to traditional piping solutions, this alternative with blue-green infrastructure in terms of investment cost can be cheaper. And it's, again, quite underestimated because these solutions, they address so many co-benefits that are not in these calculations calculated. And I didn't even mention how actually it feels great that we are around these kind of green environments. So therefore it has positive effect on mental health. Díky za vaši pozornost.
Thank you very much. Please, gentlemen, take your seats. We have a few minutes for discussion, 20 minutes. Do I have colleagues with microphones? Yes. So if anybody has a question, we will give you a mic and you can ask. Yeah, in first row. Yes. Please.
Again, thank you very much for the great presentations. And most of this, from my understanding, was focused on surplus of water. How are we going to manage when we have 1 year surplus of the water and 5 years lack of the water with the serious droughts which we experience now in Czech?
Who's supposed to answer?
What was the answer? What would be?
Who is supposed to answer?
Adjust if we have lack of the water. What would be the impact to the landscape architecture?
Yeah.
Well, what we find are these systems, because it's a drained landscape. So quite often you find people who are beginners in what we call SUDs, in this water management in the landscape, tend to assume you start planting aquatic plants and marginal plants because you're dealing with water. Whereas in actual fact, what you've seen, most of the photos today didn't have any water in them. Most of the time it's not raining. And actually, because it's a positively drained landscape, the biggest threat to the planting in our systems is drought. So we're not designing the planting for water particularly, we're designing them to be drought resilient. And what we do find is that because we are encouraging infiltration into the ground whenever it rains, we are seasonally charging the groundwater and the soil around these systems, so that there's a bigger reservoir of general moisture in the soil during those summer months that gets pulled back into the system. And then even with a very small rainfall event, if you have a period of drought, but then just a small rainfall event, because we're taking water from a larger area to these features, it means that they get a dose of water when normally they would hardly get any. So we do find that these systems are very resilient to drought. So when I went back to the project I showed you today, after our drought summer, I was expecting to see some signs of damage or failure, but it was looking more abundant than any year previously. So they do look like, you know, the choice of plants is important, but they tend to be very, very resilient to drought. I don't know if anyone else has experience on that.
I agree. The Greater Green Project, the Greater Green Project is had the same drought. We had rain, absence of rain for I think 6 or 7 weeks in summer. We were really concerned about that, but it was totally robust. The plants are, the right choice of plants is important. The system we planted was nearly all the plants were adaptable. You know, they prefer a free draining, dryish environment because the water isn't there for that long. So as Kevin says, they're not you can design suds to be wet if you want, but I think in a lot of situations they should be designed as potentially dry, and therefore the planting should be appropriate.
I could just add to that, because you touched on the water catchment approach, and if you're dealing with an area which has got higher ground that's draining into, say, Prague, then if you manage the water in the upper courses, it becomes like a sponge higher up as well. So then when you get the drought situations, the water that's higher up will carry on flowing further down for longer. And of course you might get situations where it's an extreme drought and any landscape would find it difficult to cope with that. But at least you're building in as much resilience as you possibly can.
And I can, so you understand how much water it will come to a rain garden. For example, normally the catchment area where you collect water to a rain garden, it's often 20 times bigger than the rain garden. So if 1 millimeter runoff, it is like it have been raining 20 millimeters in the rain garden. So if you run off 3 millimeters, it's directly up to 60 millimeters of rain, and then you completely fill up the topsoil with the water. So it's rather quick, get a lot of water. And then when it comes to street trees, the reason that they often are in bad condition and doesn't couple with a dry period, it is because they have so enormous little root zone, maybe 1 or 2 cubics of meters. And it's also very compacted, and they have a very big problem to get right gas exchange, so they got down oxygen down to the roots, and that's and they have a very big problem to take up the water even if there is maybe water. So instead of if we're building this system, you will have a maybe 10 to 20 cubic meters of root zones.
Thank you. Another question? Yeah.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for all your presentations. I just wanted to ask, Martin, you referred to the systems in Malm being ready to receive gray water. And I'm curious if anybody else, including yourself, has experience with integrating building functions or heating, cooling, or gray water type of situations into the landscape architecture designs.
There actually, in Malmö, there is a neighborhood called Augusteborg, and there is already this kind of construction functioning, and it's connected on the residential house that takes the gray water and it cleans and it can purify it to the extent so it can enter the water courses, and it's done through the research facility that is close by in Alnarp that I was actually studying. So this is already one project that is being done, and they found it positive. And in terms of our solution, there is possibility to easily connect it to our system and run it through, because it's like a series of treatment trains that are connected. So the water, when it goes to the system, it gets more and more cleaner, more constructions that it will enter.
Okay, answer? Or do you have another question?
I could, but no, I can pass it on.
You can. Anybody interested in questions? No? Yeah, there. We still have time, so it's okay.
Hi, I would like to push this discussion a little bit in the fact that I think in Czech Republic we already know, or there is a bunch of people who know, that it's very important to take care about water. But the politician, and let's say there is still missing a systematic solution. So we are very car orientated and let's say building up the wall in terms of flooding. So I would like to ask you, what would be your advisor, or how you discuss this issue with your politician in your cities? In fact, we are still missing some good examples in Czech Republic. So there is a discussion, but there is no really implementation, I would say, these thoughts in our cities. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you.
One thing you might have noticed from these presentations is that we really believe strongly in that these systems deliver so many extra benefits beyond just the flood management, and that means a lot of our projects, they can bring in other funding around air quality, around urban heat island effects. And these issues actually at the moment are quite trendy in the UK. Also, the microplastic issue is quite trendy at the moment in the UK. So that's why increasingly we're starting to talk about the tire dust issue, which nobody really realised before. And the tire dust is also an issue, microplastics in the river environments as well. So the same damage is caused there, probably more so because it's more concentrated. So I think really trying to tie all the people with the different interests together around this unified idea of green and blue infrastructure, and then all the benefits it can bring to health and well-being, sustainable transport routes into cities. It's so compelling. And then I think you just need people who are willing to push and push and push and challenge these conventional ideas. At the same time, you can look around the world at some of the work that's been done in other countries. So one we talked about this morning, great example is Philadelphia, where they did a cost-benefit analysis of doing what we're calling these days a super sewer. So the huge pipes underground to solve the flooding issues versus green infrastructure approach. And that cost-benefit analysis showed just how much cheaper and more beneficial the green infrastructure approach is. Now Philadelphia are embarking on a program of greening their entire city instead of building a multi-million-pound big sewer system. And so, you know, it could be those examples which might get the political traction in the Czech Republic, possibly. But you all need to be championing it as well, and pushing, challenging those people to think differently, to show them examples of the difference it can make.
You mentioned about walls and flooding, like you're talking about the river flooding, is that right? Or, yeah. I mean, as I say, we've tried to avoid walls because walls force the river further downstream. And you cannot do that. And you have to prove that's the case. And what better way, it's rather like SUDS, you're dealing at source. You're trying to deal with the problem further up the catchment. So there's a total logic in that. And obviously, again, what Kevin's saying, there's other benefits to be accrued from looking at those further up the catchment ways of doing these things, holding the flow where you can within that catchment, whether it might be relatively engineered, you know, we're actively going to use a park to hold flow. It's far better idea. It gives benefits all the way down the river system. In fact, I mean, it fades away eventually, but it's a total benefit all the way. And obviously opportunities for recreation biodiversity at the same time. So it's really important. I mean, I don't know whether the walls that are being proposed here might push the water down the river, That's what used to happen. I hope that is not happening here, that the modelling is being shown that it isn't the case. But looking at the road, I mean, it's a huge catchment, presumably, to your river here within Prague, and that's a real challenge to look at the whole forest system and agricultural system. But, you know, that's what's needed here, water quality as well as controlling the flow. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If anybody has a question in Czech language, we can translate it for our gentlemen. So, nobody? No. Gentlemen, you spent a few days in Prague. What's our situation? Do we have a chance? Is Prague a green and blue city in your eyes, in your point of view?
I think one of the exciting things is that you've got a great countryside on your doorstep. And I would encourage you to get out and about. The city is a fantastic sort of cultural place, very lively, sociable. But I'd also encourage you to get out and about, use the footpath cycleways. Don't always use the car, maybe don't always use the trams, but I think there's, you've got a fantastic hinterland. The peri-urban area is great, and the thing I love about it is the topography that you've got here as well. So there's lots of scope of working with the sort of catchment areas in the near vicinity.
I think what's really striking to me coming to Prague is it's a wonderful city, but it's very car dominated. It feels very car dominated. So whereas in London and lots of other UK cities and European cities, you're promoting bicycles in city centres and trying to demote cars, I think the opposite's true, isn't it, in Prague? The cycles are kind of banned, from which I just find completely amazing. So I'm sure a lot of you will be kind of thinking along the same lines of wanting to try and reduce car usage in the city centre. The opportunity there for placemaking, for green and blue infrastructures, if we can take away some of that, the hard paving that's devoted to the car, then maybe we can turn that back over to people and back over to these sorts of initiatives. There's big opportunities there. So it definitely feels like there are enormous opportunities. I think you also need to challenge some of the planning policies around roof types. So we visited a project today where they pushed through a green roof on a building in an area that had to have orange tiled roofs, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of those sorts of initiatives being pushed through. But certainly, if people are willing to challenge and push, I think there's enormous opportunities in Prague, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin on the car issue. I mean, at the end of the day, you get change through drivers of different forms. In Sheffield, you've seen the projects we're dealing with, the drivers' regeneration and improving the place and how people feel, and we've taken an opportunity to look at water. Here you will have different drivers. I've picked up, well, the key driver here is about heat from last summer, and you know, it's taking those drivers and using those to encourage people to think differently. And you know, if you get a repeat of these conditions, I suspect that that will start to become more and more important, and people will start to look at, you know, what do we need to do to actively address these problems? Because if it's the future for your city, you know, you're going to have to really think hard and make some quite difficult decisions, I suspect, and the car might be one of those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I found out that it's mainly the people where lays the power, and the people who can take the initiative to start to discuss and start to share the knowledge and information about these kind of projects. And especially people, for example, that we today had possibility to meet different stakeholders and collaborate together and get a little bit out of this silo perspective, which is very strong in Czech Republic. So I think the collaboration and finding the people with this interest that they have power to push this on an agenda of people of politics, that's where's the potential. And I feel that here is something crystallizing in Czech Republic. So.
Another chance for questions? No one? No? Okay, I will ask again about education, because project of Edge was near to cooperation of architects and landscape architects. It was really close together, and I think we should start there, cooperation with architects, and we also should start in universities, start to learning how to work with climate, how to work with water, and so on. So do you have some good examples? What works in England or in Sweden?
They're not doing it enough, so you can't do it enough. So we're really behind. So at the moment, there just aren't enough qualified and experienced people to fulfill the demand for good development and good design. So at the moment, we're getting 95 to 99% of projects that are being delivered through planning are considered by the planning authorities as being bad, below the expectations, because there just aren't the people who can deliver it. Now there are, some of our courses, the landscape courses, are doing it for individual modules, and Roger and I have both, been into universities, and Roger, you've done engineering courses as well. But it's small packages of training in a 2, 3, 4, 5 year sort of training program. So it's still a tiny minority. But what you do find is when we go in there and speak to students, they get what we're doing, they get the benefits, and they believe in the benefits, and they want to do it. So we are starting to change a whole generation of students, but it can't happen quick enough. And I would say that the same here. This is us, and we started doing this in the mid-1990s, and we're still, how many years that is, 20-odd years later, we're still 95 to 98% projects failing, really, on the requirements. That's not good enough. So I think there's a big opportunity to do things differently here in the Czech Republic. And I think you're exactly right. This education will be the key to making that difference.
We also have a big problem to find people that have the knowledge about this, and these changes have been going so quick. So we have in some way don't have time to adapt the universities around this, because you need first to start with the research and so on. Then you need a teacher that can teach this area. But we are running to that goal at least.
But still, it's like catching water.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Yeah.
I would like to ask you one more question. I know maintenance is a boring topic, but it's so important. So could you describe us, like all of you, just like try to summarize how your cities take care about the green infrastructure? Like, because I think in Czech Republic is definitely now a lot of discussion how to progress this. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, surface water management, sustainable drainage can happen in a variety of different ways, different sorts of features. So some will fall in the highway. So our highways department, for example, permeable roads, swales along roads, they adopt those features. In some authorities across the UK, they don't. So there's a persuading thing about the actual, do they accept these features? Because that, if they don't, they're risk averse. So you have to challenge the risks, and then slowly they realise actually we can adopt these features, and they could take them on as part of a typical housing development, for example. But there may be a very small amount of extra charge from, say, the developer who's built that housing. Then the SUDs might fall into an open space or a park. They may be taken on by what we call a management company from the developer, where the residents pay. Equally, we've set up our own management company in the local authority, so we charge the residents to look after wetlands within parks that serve the function to those occupants. So there's a variety of different things. Obviously, a green roof on a building is the roof's responsibility. It's the owner of the building. So the stuff within private is their own thing, like a school or a hospital. But the things it's the public sector things that you're probably talking about. But yeah, those are the sorts of mechanisms. Sometimes it's a sum of money paid by the developer that covers maybe 30 or even 100 years maintenance, which is happening in Wales, next to England. 100 years of costs are paid by a developer. I don't know how they afford it, but that's the proposal. We'll wait and see if that works.
And in Sweden, we have exactly the same situation as Rogers said. So there is no difference in this, and most of this system doesn't require a lot of maintenance. If you build them right and you choose right type of species, they are rather low in maintenance.
Okay. Yeah, last question. Almost there.
First of all, thank you for your inspiring lectures. But there has been said something about trees in the streets, and I remain be interested in what's the common experience with the cells for roots, the plastic constructions which you put under the construction layer of the pavement. How is it in practice? Or yeah, how common it is in your profession? Thank you.
Well, we're often accused of being a bit quite purist and anti-product and anti-engineering, whereas we're not. When we're doing sort of structural tree pits like that in hard paved areas, so there's a project I showed in my presentation yesterday where we did exactly that, very constrained high street environment, hard paved all the way around. If we have the space available, then we would go for systems more like Martin and Kent were demonstrating. In this scenario, this was a project in London, we had so little space available in the street underground between all the cables and pipes. The only spaces we were able to exploit were too small, and so we had to then very carefully consider whether we use a system like that, which enabled more volume of water. And it comes with issues. It comes with the fact that we are putting plastic in the ground, and we need to be confident that we can recycle that, and that it lasts long enough, and that we can recycle it when at the end of its lifespan. It's a recycled plastic in itself, so it's relatively neutral in that sense. But also then we did incorporate services within it, so they are able to have services running through them, but you then have to be aware that those companies might need to come through and put a new service down or change that one or do some work to it. And how easy is this system to respond to them coming in? Will they break it? Will they then destroy all the other functionality of water management in the system? So we're just very careful when we look at products like that. And for us, it's kind of, if we need to resort to a product like that, then it has its place. But we're very aware then of the limitations and the costs, because they tend to be significantly more expensive than the sort of the other systems we've seen. So these sorts of systems have their place. The problem is that what Kent and Martin have demonstrated isn't a product. So there's no one going round to designers and universities selling it as a product. But you will get then with the plastic systems, and it's the same we've seen with green roofs and blue roofs. There's lots of people willing to go around and tell you how amazing their plastic product is. But what they won't do is tell you the alternative approaches that might be a lot cheaper and potentially a lot more ecologically and sustainable. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
And the only thing that I can add to that is that I have heard that there should be one construction in Sweden with this plastic, but that's only what I know. So I have no experience at all with this construction.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we ran out of time. So thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. It was really inspiring and really important to Prague. Once again, Ian Clark, Kevin Barton, Roger Nowell, Kent Friedel, and Martin Vysoky. Já vám za sebe ještě jednou děkuju moc, že jste přišli. Doufám, že budete tohle téma sledovat dál, stejně jako my.